Okay, I got it. Okay, I'm going to start time now. We strongly affirm the resolution that the United States should implement year-round schooling for K-12 education. Let's go directly onto the plan text. The plan text is that the United States should implement year-round schooling for K-12 education. The plan will be modeled off of China's year-long education system, which comprises of a 12-month period, a quarter system, and 2-week breaks within each quarter. We define this round as a policy round, hence the agent should. Hence the word should in the resolution, and the agent in this case is going to be the United States. The weighing mechanism of this round is going to be utilitarianism, and you can use net benefits, meaning that the team that proves they do the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people should be winning today's debate. Let's go on to some solvency. One, we can see that the United States has the shortest school year in the status quo, and the plan would allow for the same amount of break for each of these students, not impeding on their mental health, but also giving them all the benefits of year-round schooling. Second, we can say year-round schooling has been proven to allow students to obtain higher test scores,
Point of information.
higher retention rates, because they are not off from school for long periods of time. Yeah, what's up?
Does the plan increase the number of hours that students spend in school?
No, because the amount of hours
Okay.
in school is the same. It's just the amount of, yeah, okay. The third point in solvency is that China specifically has amazing schooling rates right now, and where we will be modeling off of their education system and their year-round education system. On to the first and sole advantage of education. Let's go into some uniqueness. One, we can see that education in the United States is doing poorly right now. Look to the fact that due to COVID-19, the virus has exacerbated socioeconomic disparities, such as lack of technology to access online schooling for less well-off students. Second, we can see that anecdotal evidence from across the country shows steep declines in attendance, a rising number of failing grades in 2021 and 2020 in the 2020 to 2021 school year. Let's go on to the links. One, we can see that year-long schooling is modeled off of China would be the most successful. Look to the fact that Chinese students came out on top in OECD's program for international student assessments, and which is a test that accounts for reading, math, and science skills of 15-year-olds around 65 countries. Second, we can see that year-long schooling is proven to maximize student scores as well as their retention rates. Two major meta-analyses of studies on year-round schooling have shown that students in year-round schools perform better in terms of academic achievement and standardized testing than schools in traditional schools. And honestly, this just makes sense when you think about it, right? When you have less, longer periods of breaks, students are able to recall more information. Not the likelihood of them forgetting this information is also a lot lower, and thus they obviously just perform a lot better in school itself. Let's go on to some internal links. One, we can see that scoring better on assessments increases the chance that these students can get a higher education. Look to the fact that universities that are considered elite or T20 have standardized test thresholds that students have to meet in order to get accepted. If these students are given a better education because they have higher retention rates, then obviously they'll score better on assessments and get better education in the future. Second, we can see that higher retention rates boost individual knowledge, which allows them to perform better in the long run. Look to the fact that student retention is of key importance to institutions and their faculty, as universities actually even look towards improving graduation rates and decreasing the loss of tuition revenue from students. This proves that they're important. This proves that retention rates are really, really important for educational success, and that's something that a year-long school system directly provides for these students. Third, we can see that year-long schooling has been proven to be better for low-income students as well. Look to the fact that many studies show that year-round schooling keeps vulnerable students from falling further behind and ensures that these students benefit more consistently from school meals as well as other services. Basically, the argument is that when we have long periods of break, these students aren't able to access all of the help that they can get from the school, while school is closed down, meaning that having year-round schooling and shorter breaks in between actually allows for them to have a better educational, have better education in the long run and have a better school environment. What are the impacts? One, we can see that the lack of education leads to systemic poverty. Look to the fact that literacy rates are directly correlated with unemployment. You can also see that poverty takes an average of 6 years off of a person's life, which means that it's going to be a huge impact within today's debate. Second, you can see that education is going to also be key to economic stability as a whole. For example, the National Bureau of Economics research says that if we boosted all US students' basic skills, we could grow the GDP by 14.6% by 2095. That's an increase of $32 trillion. We can also see that this ensures the greatest quality of life as stable economies lead to less unemployment and less poverty. At the end of the day, because year-round schooling allows for these students to maintain the amount of breaks that they have in the status quo, however, significantly increase their retention rates, significantly increase their educational success when it comes to standardized testing and general schooling as well. And finally, because it significantly helps low-income students, you're going to be proudly voting for the affirmative.
All right, quickly off time, I'm going to be giving.
Pasting the CP text.
Yes.
Okay.
Quickly off time, I'm going to be.
Oh, Soren, if you're talking, you're muted right now.
Sorry about that. Quickly off time, I'm going to be giving 2 off and then responding to Case. All right. My time starts now. My opponent and I negate the resolution to resolve that the U.S. states should implement year-round schooling for K through 12 education. The first off is a disadvantage called summer jobs. Currently, we can see that high schoolers need summer jobs in order to support themselves and their family. Summer jobs provide income. Summer jobs provide necessary money to spend to pay for college. Summer jobs are used by students to help support their family through economic woes, and this is disproportionately used by low-income students who need the money the most. Unique to subpoint 2 is that summer jobs also provide work experience. According to the Department of Labor, teens who engage in a summer job see a 14 to 16% increase in their income by the time they turn 20, because they have more work experience, they have more experience on the job, and when they're submitting their resume, it actually has something on it, which is crucial to supporting future careers and future references. Further, according to a study by Youth First, students that take summer jobs are actually far less likely to drop out of high school, because they have economic stability, because they have economic stability, and they have stability over the they have economic stability, and so they're far less likely to drop out. And the fourth subpoint is that this particularly helps low-income students. And so this all comes from a Brookings study. Students who engage in summer jobs, especially low-income ones, end up having less negative behavior, according to Brookings. That includes things like crimes committed, suggesting that it's necessary. Because, and a good reason that this might be is that it gives stability. It gives stability. And it gives economic stability. It also is linked with a higher increase in income and income mobility, according to Brookings. And further, it leads to an increase in educational outcomes for low-income students, according to Brookings. In general, the Brookings study finds that supporting summer jobs for low-income students is necessary for solving poverty in the United States. The link here is pretty clear. If you eliminate a summer vacation, then teens will no longer have access to summer jobs. It no longer becomes a viable way of combating poverty, providing a work experience, and the impacts of summer jobs on things like educational outcomes are also lost as well. When we eliminate the opportunity for summer jobs, we do 2 key things. First, we force low-income students to be engaging in who need the money to support their family and support themselves, to be engaging in jobs outside during school periods, which is really dangerous for their educational outcomes and very inequitable, because it gives a significant bias towards richer students who don't have the burden to support their families. But also, a lot of students will end up being unable to support any jobs at all, which means that we reverse all of the positive impacts of summer jobs across the board. And so the impacts here are huge. It means that we see a decrease. It means that we prevent summer jobs from being able to solve the cycle of poverty and help people escape the cycle of poverty, especially for low-income people. It means that we get worse educational outcomes and higher dropout rates. It means that we see a worse quality of life as income and the ability to support people's families is lost, and we see more inequity in our school system because students are forced to take jobs during the school year. They can't focus on homework, and we see an increase in an entrenchment of income inequality in our school system, which is very dangerous. The second off point is a counterplan. The text is as follows: the U.S. implements year-round schooling for K through 12 and maintains summer breaks for high schoolers. I will send that in the chat. Oh, it went away. Leo, can you send it in the chat? So this is competitive because while the side affirmation this is competitive because while side affirmation has year-round schooling for everybody, it is directly counter to the summer breaks and the conception of the counter plan, which is to continue to have summer breaks for high school students. And the main idea of this counter plan is that it provides an opportunity for high schoolers to engage in summer jobs and engage in activities over the summer. And the reason why, but it allows for the benefits of year-round schooling to apply for younger students. And one important thing when it comes to looking at the benefits of the plan versus the counter plan is that the benefits that my opponents bring up for year-round schooling don't really apply to high schoolers where classes are independent. I'll get to that a little bit later. So let's go on to the ask, starting with the first page on solvency. So their main complaint about the U.S. school system is that the school year and the amount of hours that students have in school isn't long enough. But they concede in questioning when asked by my partner that there's not actually going to be a change in the hours that students have in school. So because of this, they make a key strategic error when they're not actually solving the problem that my opponents claim is the key problem with our education system. Now let's look at my opponents. Let's move sheets to my opponent's one and only advantage for their plan. I have 6 key responses. The first one is that it looks at their China evidence. Correlation does not imply causation. There are far more factors at hand when it comes to Chinese learning outcomes versus American ones. Things like culture, things like economic support, broader ideas of the school system and how that school system is maintained and funded will have far more impact. So there's no real ability to look at to compare these systems when no causal analysis have been made by either their evidence or even their analysis. Don't let them bring that up in this next speech because we would only be able to respond in the last. The second key response is that the counter plan solves this. So my opponents talk about things like summer drip. Yes, that's true. The counter plan solves that when it solves for the areas where summer drip and retention is important. And retention is really most important when the classes are not independent. And that means middle school and elementary schools when material like reading actually builds off of each other. While in the high school context, classes are more independent and learning outcomes don't build on each other nearly as much. So the counter plan solves basically all of the impacts that my opponents complain about without the overreach of affecting high schoolers. The third key response is that there's as kind of an extension. There's no uniqueness for high schoolers here where classes are independent from each other. The fourth response is a turn. So this uses our youth first card that shows that summer jobs increase graduation rates and educational outcomes. This applies to our Brookings evidence too, especially for lower income. So you're actually harming education, especially for lower income people. Another turn is cross applies to the second link of the disad. Teens will have to teens, especially lower income ones, will have to drop out in order to support their families if they don't have somewhere to provide income. And then the sixth response is that you're going to prefer neg on poverty because this plan harms poor people especially. So because of these reasons, I'm proud to support the negation.
That's good.
You-
All right. Is everybody good for an order? All right, cool. It'll be the top of case, the advantage, then the counterplan, and then the disset. Is everybody good? Okay, cool. Starting on the top of case, they have one response to our solvency argument saying that we don't change any of the hours in school, so we don't solve for the core of our issue. This is not our argument. The argument that we specifically make is that the organization of the school year right now is horrible. Even if we don't change the specific amount of hours that students are being in school, the point that we're making is that if you have these large summer breaks in between important periods of schooling for these students, then it means that their retention rates are inherently lower, which is all of the warrants that we cite in our solvency argument. Specifically, look to the fact that year-round schooling has been proven to allow students to obtain higher test scores and such. And this is because of the fact that we have such large summer breaks in the status quo. This means that we have solvency for our advantage, but it also means that there's a large deficit of solvency to the counterplan. Now go to the advantage. The overview to the advantage is that they are far behind on the fact that the education system in the status quo is horrible. It is causing mass amounts of poverty, and it is causing many students, and it is also causing a large detriment to the U.S. economy as a whole and macroeconomic stability as a whole, which is a key differentiating point in this debate. However, the affirmative is able to solve for this. We are able to increase the time that students are actually getting retention and ultimately improve their test scores and send them off to better and better universities, as well as giving them more educational opportunities as a whole, which is all of the conceded internal links. Now I'll do the line by line. Their first argument here is that China is correlation and not causation because there are far too many alternative causes. Our response is that it's still applicable. They have similar sized economies. Culture is not a factor because ultimately it does not matter because these students will still be in school right now. If their argument that US students would still would be less motivated or something, that's just wrong because these students do not have the opportunity to be there in the status quo. They say that you should not let us bring this up. Obviously, we should be allowed to make refutations to arguments that they make regarding our our most key warrants. Now, their second argument here is the counterplan solves for the areas where retention is important. They don't really explain this argument, and it's noteworthy it's noteworthy that the counterplan literally allows for a summer break, which is the entire argument that we're criticizing that specifically reduces retention rates in the status quo. Their next argument is that it doesn't affect high schoolers because classes are independent from each other. This argument does not make a lot of sense. It's pretty clear that if high schoolers have more consistent scheduling where they are learning year round instead of taking these massive breaks, it still means that they would be getting more retention in each of their classes individually throughout the entirety of the year. Their fourth response is that they turn because jobs increase graduation rates. First, I'll answer all of this Brookings analysis on the disadvantage more specifically. But second is that we don't stop students from taking these jobs. We are going to make specific arguments on the dissat about how students can still work these summer jobs while also being in school to actually increase all of their retention rates. But the third response here is that this turn is not responsive to the fact that the education system is horrible right now. And that is the key thing that is sending these people into poverty. Yes, summer jobs might prevent some marginal amount of groups from staying out of poverty, but a lot of people are not taking summer jobs in the status quo, which means that a more direct way to solve for this is actually through our plan. Their fifth argument is that teens will essentially drop out because they have to support their family. First argument is that this is happening in the status quo with or without summer jobs, meaning that it's a non-unique issue and neither side can actually solve for it. But even if you don't buy that neither side can truly solve for it, we are the only side that has an attempt to address the root cause of the issue, which is specifically that these teens are not getting good enough education in the status quo, and that is sending them into deeper cycles of poverty, which entrench their families in the future, which means that if you want to solve for familial poverty, then you have to be able to give students better educational opportunities, which the counterplan simply does not do. There's six arguments that they outweigh on poverty with no argument as to how they actually do this. First, there are far more students who are not taking summer jobs in the status quo and are simply just failing out. Second is the time frame in the status quo is key. More students than ever have failing grades and declines in attendance, and are probably also not taking as many or are not doing as much work because of the pandemic, meaning that there's a unique chance for more and more people to slip into poverty in the status quo. So year-round schooling is key to solve for these next couple of years, which the counterplan simply does not address. Now, they've also dropped all of our internal link scenarios about how we help students score better on assessments, and how specifically colleges that consider themselves elite usually only admit students beyond the threshold for how they score on like assessments like the SAT and ACT, meaning that if we increase preparedness for these students by increasing their retention rates and increasing the ability they have to actually do well on tests, which is all of our warrants. Sorry, I don't have time for the PR right now. Maybe like I can take it at the end. But yeah, you can also extend the second internal link that the higher retention rates boost like the individual knowledge, which allows them to perform better, which overall increases their education as a whole. You should extend that education leads to systemic poverty because of the fact that literacy rates are directly correlated with low unemployment, and also lots of students who don't get educated are essentially not able to go to college and not able to get jobs, which obviously hurts them a lot. But you can also extend that education is key to economic stability as a whole. This global macroeconomic stability that they don't touch affects poverty on a much larger scale, because if the economy is weak, then it means that people who aren't affected by this direct education crisis are also inherently getting like sent into like deeper cycles of poverty, meaning you should overcorrect affirmative and vote for the plan to solve for this macroeconomic stability. The counterplan. The first argument here is that this is functionally the status quo. They say that it's year-round schooling with a summer break, which is like literally no different than what we have in the world right now. They just established that like that there is summer, but second is that even if they still like don't like change like, or second is that they would lose like, but if it actually is a drastic change from the status quo, the second argument here is that you would lose a ton of schooling. This outweighs all of their arguments about how summer jobs provide these people with opportunities to make money, because education is the most important factor into controlling poverty. The fourth argument here is that colleges look towards high school statistics for admissions, meaning that it probably matters more that these people can actually get higher retention rates and stay in school longer for an overall period of time, which means that they don't have any solvency and only the affirmative does. Simply put, either the counterplan maintains the status quo, which is obviously bad, or the counterplan just subtracts a ton of days from the school year, which is also bad, because that would just worsen the effects of the status quo. So you should not vote for the counterplan because it doesn't solve the case, and the case outweighs the disadvantage. Now, the disadvantage. Our first argument here is that we outweigh long-term. Getting education gives far better jobs because we increase educational opportunities, and we also preserve macroeconomic stability as a whole by preserving the GDP and essentially preventing people who are not directly affected by this crisis from like actually like not falling into poverty. Second argument is net benefits. We're talking about K through 12 education. Usually only juniors and seniors are eligible to get jobs because of age requirements, which means that currently students who are like like preschoolers, who obviously are not preschoolers, but like first graders who can't work summer jobs are like falling behind in the status quo, meaning that they are not getting an accurate, like steady, like preparedness. The third argument here is that summer jobs are usually minimum wage, which means that it's not enough to keep these families who are on the brink of poverty afloat, which means that even if they can preserve these people for some amount of time, they will fall into poverty inevitably, which means that we outweigh all of their arguments on magnitude. Fourth argument is that you should be extremely skeptical of this Brookings study. They don't be fooled by the name. They don't cite any warrants behind it. They just assert that Brookings says that more people will be able to be more economically stable and they will stay in school longer. But this simply doesn't matter because there's no like logical warranting behind this. Fifth argument is that most students work year-round after school anyways, which the plan doesn't solve for. Sixth argument is they can still work and get a good education. They still get large breaks, and generally they will have more retention, so it'll take less effort in school, meaning they can focus more time on work, and there's not a substantial trade-off. Ultimately, vote AF because only the plan can solve for education. Summer jobs is like massively outweighed, and the counter plan just doesn't do anything.
Okay, the order is going to be counterplan, disad, and then the AF. And when I say the AF, I mean I'm going to do the top and then the advantage. Everybody good?
Actually, give me 1 second.
Okay.
All right, you're good.
Okay. Time starts now. I do not understand the arguments that my opponent gives in response to our counter plan. Like, the pick is the pick. We read a pick. We pick out of K through 8. The text is in the chat, right? They say it's functionally the status quo, but for K through 8, that's like, what? 9 years out of the total 12 or 13 that people that people are being educated in the United States, we are solving the problems and being very much not the status quo, the AF, right? Whereas we are not that's not the case. Whereas we maintain the access to summer jobs. My opponent says that there's going to be a loss of schooling. No, just like the affirmation, we change in no way the amount of hours of school that a child is getting. Second, they say that high school stats are what matters to colleges who are making like acceptances and like college admissions offices. But again, we see that like having a job is considered very highly by admissions officers, especially in like is considered very highly in admissions officers. They're very good and very trained at like understanding like circumstances and making decisions based off of it. Most important. And early learning outcomes are the ones that like they actually know less about, and those are the ones that we need to like have people be educated. So by making sure that that we provide a year-round school for the youth, then that's really what matters. All right, on to the disad, starting onto the disad. They say that in the long term they outweigh by preserving GDP, but that simply isn't true. We say that we're going to see a disruption of GDP because we're completely shifting the system and taking people out of work, as we read with the unrefuted internal link story, where we tell that either people are going to work in school, which is going to decrease their educational outcome, or they're not going to work at all because they're going to reverse uniqueness. If somebody works at like a full time over the summer, there's 40-hour work week. There's no way they're going to replace this. Like, there's no way you can do that when you are engaged in school. You need to have no other engagements at that time. You need someone, and that's what our evidence shows. They say that this is only true of juniors and seniors, but according to the Fair Labor Standards Act sets the minimum working age to be 14 in the United States, which means that we actually gain a hugely important amount of solvency by having with the counter plan where we have year-round school for K through 8 and then open it up and give high school students a summer break. What we're actually telling them is that, all right, instead of young children who are given a break for basically no reason, we're saying, all right, high schoolers, now that you're entering high school, now that you're of legal working age, we're giving you this opportunity to go over the summer and go and engage in work. So we actually see that with the counter plan, we're going to see an increase in people engaging in summer work, because it means that we're signaling the beginning of high school and making them aware of the openness of work. Meanwhile, we're actually going to see with the counter plan a massive increase in education, and the whole analysis that this is true only for juniors and seniors isn't true, because they misunderstand the minimum working age. They say that this is minimum wage, not enough, but again, they have parents supporting them. This can only be positive impacts because they're providing income to their family. We prefer the impacts we read you here. We tell you that our evidence shows that this increase in income has seen substantial outcomes in things like a decrease in negative behavior. They say that our bookings card has no warrants, but that simply isn't true. So on Luigi himself cites warrants the fact that people gain practical working skills, they gain income, they gain job experience, they gain things that they can go and put on resumes. These are all things that the increase in income, the increase in stability, and the decrease in negative behavior. So we do provide evidence. They say that somehow in the app world that people will be able to work and get a good education at the same time. How? We don't see this. Why is it that we don't see people? Why is it that we see people working way more in summer than in the school year in the status quo? Because when you are engaged in school, you cannot physically be working. If you're doing homework, you cannot be working. You cannot work a 40-hour work week while still being in school, because and that is really what is in demand that's really what's in demand from employers right now. They want people who can work full time, and they would rather that people work full time over the summer than extremely part time during a slight amount of the year. All right, on the on the app side of the flow, starting with the whole issue of solvency, they say that what someone points out about the time spent educating isn't relevant, and that wasn't the argument. But what we see is, and that they say that the argument is that the current system is education system is horrible and is proven to have lead to bad scores and lots of dropout rates. But what we're telling you is that they have an immense solvency deficit. They claim to like be solving our education system and exacting the like huge increase in GDP, but they tell you themselves that the main problem is the fact that we're simply not giving people enough hours. So as long as the AF doesn't have any solvency there, their ability to solve like economy and education is extremely reduced, and they have no solvency whatsoever. The advantage. Just go over my opponent's responses in order. First, they talk about the overview. They say that the status quo is horrible, but they solve by decreasing retention. Again, we've provided you across the slide, and I'll get into a little bit more later, that really the issues with retention and things are with young students. The evidence that they provide you in this round are things like literacy. That's when we're talking about year-round school. That's when we're talking about school policies for people in elementary school. The counter plan and the plan look exactly the same in those circumstances. So they also say that comparing to China is still applicable, culture doesn't matter. But really, to make any attempt at creating any sort of causal relationship, any link story, any warrant, you need to be able to isolate two factors. There are so many factors that make China different than the United States. Culture, different funding systems for their education, different amount of time that people are spent in school. So there's really no way you can compare China to the United States when they're so different. You cannot isolate one causal relationship. Additionally, they say that we have no explanation of why the counter plan solved, but we tell you ourselves, when you're in high school, you're taking very separate classes each year. 1 year you take bio, 1 year you take chem, 1 year you take physics. They're very separate. There's no really retention issue between those two. That's not really a concern whatsoever. Whereas it's the young children who are engaged in things like reading, engaged in like long-term, I don't know, mathematics education, learning the times tables or whatever over the course of many years, who need year-round school, and the counter plan provides that. So really, it's not even that the counter plan only solves for for 3/4 of the app. It actually solves for basically all of it, because only for young people is when retention matters. They say that basically this argument doesn't make sense because they provide more consistent scheduling, but again, that's not how we see high school classes are taught. They're considered to be independent blocks, and the retention problem is solved in a way that allows us to provide good education without having to be concerned about, oh, that's time. Thank you.
All right, quickly off time, I have 3 key voting issues to analyze in this round, and then I'll be weighing. Actually, I'll give a global overview, 3 key voting issues to analyze and weigh. Time starts now. To give you a global overview for why the negation has won this round, it's that the counter plan is targeted at providing year-round education for those who need it the most, K through 8, without sacrificing major negative impacts on education and combating poverty that eliminating the chances of summer jobs would have. That's the net benefits of the counter plan. We absorb the vast majority of the positive impacts of the affirmation, but because we come from a targeted perspective, we don't trigger the disadvantage in a way that would and that's why you're going to vote neg. The first key voting issue to analyze in this round is going to be counter plan solvency for education. Remember Leo and my analysis from the start of this round. Retention is only important structurally in the way that we design K through 8 curriculums, and the counter plan, because we provide year-round education through K through 8, solves this problem. And by providing retention, so we gain the educational opportunities. Further, we extend Leo's analysis that early learning outcomes are the most important long term, because if you start behind, then you can't get ahead. That means that because the counter plan solves those early learning outcomes, we solve the vast majority of the issues with that having year-round income would solve. Further, look at the content of the evidence. In the status quo, the vast majority of schools that are year-round are K through 8, which means their evidence A is only applicable to K through 8 and is proving our point for us. and why the counter plan is more beneficial. So we can so we solve the vast majority of their entire case, and this idea is basically unrefuted throughout the round. Protect the flow here, but we will bring up POOs. The second key voting issue is learning equity, and this is a point that I made. This is a point that I made in my first speech and was brought down the flow that is completely unresponded to. The issue with eliminating the summer break for high schoolers is that while it has dramatically worse impacts for lower income people in three key ways. First, poor students need summer jobs more. They are using those summer jobs more. My opponents say that summer jobs have been decreasing. That might be true for rich students, but that actually proves our point. The second key reason why this causes learning equity issues is that it means that summer jobs are, and because getting rid of summer jobs is just disproportionately impacting on low income students who gain the most from gaining the income and gaining that experience. First, also look at the turn here that students are going to drop out to provide for their families when they would normally have the summer to do that. That has major impacts on learning outcomes, especially for low income people, showing the dramatically. Okay.
This like turn wasn't extended in the 2NC, so I think it's like shadow extended in the LOR, so you should like evaluate it.
So Leo gives the same kind of analysis that gives the same analysis ideas about how it's far more difficult, if not impossible, to have a summer job during school. I'll leave it up to the judges. I'm restarting my time now. I have 2 minutes 55 elapsed. Time starts now. So yes, extend this dropout turn, the negative impacts on low-income people. The third key issue to look at here is poverty. The counter plan gains the vast majority of solvency through the educational benefits, as I mentioned earlier, but it also prevents the loss of solvency and the harms to poverty caused by getting rid of summer jobs. Remember what Brookings says. Brookings, a very reputable and source that actually we have evidence for directly, says that summer jobs are key into solving poverty in the United States. Getting rid of this opportunity is going to entrench poverty for years to come. First, look at our analysis here and the evidence and the warrants that references that experience is not only good for getting more jobs in the future, it's also important for college. I had the evidence in my first point from the Department of Labor that says that there's a 16% increase in income, and this is important and it simply provides income opportunities for low income families. That's huge. Now let's do some weighing. Their points about solving education is massively mitigated by the counter plan that has all those impacts too. Summer jobs have a high probability of being crucial for poverty. Look at the analysis by Brookings, and further, learning equity has a high magnitude structural violence impact, and because it's structural violence, it also has high probability for first here. That's why you're going to vote neg. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Okay. 5 minutes. Okay, if everyone is ready, then I'll start my time now. Overview. Both sides are essentially trying to solve for the same thing, ensuring that these students don't go into poverty. However, the affirmative is clearly winning on the magnitude level, as we are not only solving for the students being affected, but also the US economy as a whole. Let's talk about the affirmative, right? The overview here is that the only argument we need to win is that the negative has no way to help students get better test scores and get into college. Our China warrant is applicable in this case because it isolates the education system, helps students be more focused in school, and ultimately because of that, they end up scoring higher on test scores. We still get the China warrant also because they have dropped that the economic stability of China and the US are similar, so implementation would still result in the same effect. But even if you don't buy that, look to the fact that we restructure the education system as a whole, which helps these students get better test scores. Extend our OECD test warrant because this proves that these students are going to get better test scores when it comes to like year-round education. They completely drop all of these warrants that we give you. Second, you can see that there's no solvency deficit, right? They dropped the 2AC response, which is essentially that the structure of the school is the issue, not necessarily the amount of days and the amount of hours that these students are going to school. And finally, we can see that high school stats is always going to outweigh. Even if students work a bunch of jobs, they cannot get into the best schools because they don't get good enough test scores. So year-round education is going to be specifically key for high school students, which is something that the counterplan simply doesn't solve for. However, the affirmative would increase equity by helping lower income students get higher test scores and go to better schools in the long run. And finally, we can see that this solves for poverty as well as the economy because we get people into college in the best way and we allow them for the best way to like train them in the workforce. And finally, like their turn isn't responsive because like we give these students better economic opportunities in the long term because of these educational benefits. Second, let's look into the counterplan. The reason you're not going to be evaluating like the counterplan today's debate is because it simply does not solve the AF case as the entirety of the AF case as well as the disadvantage. They say that high school students wouldn't be affected because they get the same hours of schooling. However, this is not true because our entire argument is that they wouldn't be able to garner the benefits of year-long schooling. This includes retention rates and higher standardized testing scores and all the other benefits. We also argue that it is even more essential for high schoolers to have year-long schooling because they're taking more tests and stuff, which inevitably impacts college decisions the most. And finally, to the point where like these high schoolers can still get jobs through the year-long system, they don't really have any unique solvency when it comes to this, meaning that we're clearly outweighing here. Third, let's go on to the disadvantage, right? They completely misconstrue the story of the disadvantage, and it's really simple. Like year-long schooling allows students to have a much more focused school environment, which inevitably allows them to perform a lot better in school. Also, you can extend specifically the internal link that of the plan, internal link that the plan independently helps like these low-income students a lot more. They're quality like
Yeah, she's cutting off for me also.
better necessary. Even if you don't buy that
Kaya,
level by helping high schoolers right now.
Kaya. We like paused time a while
Wait,
ago.
yeah,
You were
what's
like
up?
cutting out a lot. Okay, I think
Oh,
everyone should
okay,
like
wait,
turn off
where
their cameras just to like, you know, just like
yeah.
help the Wi-Fi. Like,
Wait, sorry, where did y'all lose me?
The last argument you read is the internal link plan helps low-income students more than the counter.
Okay, cool. I'll start from there then. Time
David,
resumes.
how much time did you have left?
Yeah, I wasn't timing, so I
Because I have 3:02 as well.
Yeah, there's 2 minutes left in the speech.
All right. Okay. Time resumes now. So again, extend the internal link that basically the plan independently helps these low-income students a lot more because they're given sufficient amounts of resources from the school, which is crucial to them having a good quality of life. Third, we can see that year-round schooling makes their lives a lot easier because they can retain information better, so they can still do less hours of work if necessary. And also, even if you don't buy that, the affirmative outweighs because we solve on a magnitude level by helping high schoolers right now in the status quo where they're clearly struggling, which you can see from our uniqueness. Let's go on. Oh, and finally, they don't have the greatest economic impact because like these summer jobs are literally minimum wage, meaning when it comes on and they don't contribute as much to the economy. So when it comes to like a magnitude level, we're clearly winning here. Let's go on to some impact calculus. One, we can see that poverty is going to be the biggest issue and both sides agree. However, only the affirmative clearly solves for this at best. Look to the fact that our poverty impact outweighs here specifically because you can extend the fact that like our third impact, that good education ensures the greatest quality of life as stable economies lead to less unemployment and less poverty. I mean, we're not only solving for like these students, but we're also solving for others who are hurt by a poor GDP, meaning that we're going to be winning on the magnitude level. We are also outweighing on time frame. They've dropped we also outweigh on time frame, which can come first paired with magnitude because they've dropped the 2IC argument that students cannot work summer jobs during the pandemic, and they're a unique risk of going into extreme poverty. Even if both sides solve long term, we outweigh because we solve for the most amount of people and the weighing mechanism enough benefits. For these reasons, vote F.
Okay, both of the ballots are in, so y'all can come on back. So welcome back. Thank you for a very, very good debate. We'll try and make this brief so that y'all can go eat food and all of that and all of that. Dhruva, do you want to go first?
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll also announce the decision. So this is a really, really close round, but it ends up being a 2-0 decision for the negative from Lincoln. So I guess I can go first. I wrote a pretty detailed RFD, so you can go and read it later on once you get access to your RFDs, but I'm also going to post it in the chat here so you can like read it later on. I can't copy into it, that's fine. Basically, I think that the neg is controlling a lot of the internal link level of the debate. I think on paper, upon like a rudimentary glance of, or like a cursory glance at the flow, it seems like all of the impacts are flowing off, but those impacts are being controlled by the internal link, which is held by the negative. And I think that that is where the AF is getting a little bit tripped up on the line by line execution. So essentially, everybody asks me to evaluate poverty as the largest impact in the round. So that's what I end up looking at. Reading my flow, I find that this like econ impact from the PMC is predicated on one specific analytic that says that boosting all US student basic skills increases GDP. And that's what the collapse comes down to. The problem is that you don't get access to this argument because the neg makes the argument that all of this United States student basic skills is taught in K through 8, which means that this impact is non-unique to the AF. And this is not like, this gets flowed through to the last speech. And so the neg counterplan is able to resolve the GDP question. And this also applies to the other route which you try and get to this GDP question, or this like relieving poverty question, which is through literacy rates, which impacts out to poverty on the impact level of the advantage. And so the neg is also controlling this argument because they say that literacy specifically refers to learning how to read in K through 8, and that doesn't apply to things that happen afterwards. And so the AF isn't controlling the internal link story to the only impacts that you're reading. So you claim that lack of education causes systemic poverty, and that's true, but the warranting and the analytic work that you do is predicated on literacy rates being connected with unemployment. And since you go all in on GDP and poverty, unemployment is the route to be able to get there. And so even if I don't vote for neg right there, I look for any other way I can resolve the impact of poverty, such as the disad. And so I think that generally the analytics coming from the neg are flowing ahead. I think that the AF responses to the disad are like mitigatory at best and like defensive. And there's also a lot of like analytic work that gets extended through. So in reference to anything related to like poverty, the argument that like teens who work earn 16% more, like when they turn 20 because they have more work experience, or like how summer work is key to future careers and references. Like these are very small nuanced arguments that end up getting extended through. And there's also a very important argument that comes out which gets extended that says that summer jobs is the internal link to being able to resolve poverty in the United States, which I think is a big claim, but it doesn't get contested and it gets extended through every speech. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm willing to buy that the neg is able to control this link story much better than the AF is, even though I think that the AF impacts have higher magnitude. In terms of test scores and like university level education, I think that again, the negative is slightly ahead here because the AF isn't winning the link story of whether or not people are going to drop out when they get into high school because they have to work more. The AF doesn't engage enough with this argument. I think you're also not winning the argument, or you're not ahead on this idea that like the working age begins at 14 or all of those things. Like there's just certain analytics that are missing from the AF here. And the neg also asked me to evaluate equity as a high probability impact inside of the round. So I also flow neg on the question of equity inside of this debate. I'm willing to buy that it disproportionately hurts poor folks to not allow them to work, right? I would even go so far as to caution the AF in saying that minimum wage work is lowly contributing to the economy, which is true. And you're bordering on the line of saying that minimum wage work is like useless, which is just somewhere that you don't want to be. And so I would just be very careful making those kinds of claims. And so based on that, I think that the neg is ahead, and I'm basically going for a stronger link story and access to the impact level. Sorry if that's a little bit like long-winded.
As always, it is a pleasure judging with David. He seems to always read my mind when it comes to these RFDs. So pretty much a lot of what he said is true. However, what I think lean more towards is this whole idea of the economic benefit that we're getting from sending high schoolers to be into the workforce, whether it be for minimum wage or otherwise, versus kind of saving that and investing them into longer term, better, potentially better careers in the future. So I'm looking at like both of these sides, right? And then from the neg, they give me a more convincing story of like, okay, so we need for various reasons, whether it be allowing them to afford more familiar support or to afford college in the first place, we need high schoolers to be able to be contributing to the workforce. The only argument I really get against this is that like there is a potential that they will work out to be better investments to the overall GDP if we allow them to be studied and invested into. But in my mind, that's more of a speculative investment than like the actual tangible impact of having people work minimum wage. And contrary to, I think, what David said, minimum wage workers actually make up a huge deal of the workforce in America today. So like, while they don't bring home as much pay, they are like absolutely essential products of the workforce. So kind of cutting that supply down, in my mind, has some detrimental impacts. So in that regard, I feel like neg has, yes, a better link story. However, AF, like for future reference, there's a lot of things that you were like almost teasing, and coming from as a formal parley debater myself, it's almost like leaving something to be desired. For example, if you made these timeframe arguments to be more forward-looking, and you made the arguments, for example, that minimum wage is being killed by automation anyway, or that high school jobs, or like not all high schoolers are really tending to go to college, but some of them are more interested in trade schools or more interested in non-college, non-traditional college routes. This leaves me with a lot more like wiggle room on the AF to be like, maybe these impacts are a little bit more important to look at versus just what the neg is saying of like, hey, the best path is, the minimum wage job that allows them to go to college, that type of thing. So especially if you made that like automation forward-looking argument, I feel like there was a lot more paths to the ballot. There's just a little bit more creativity with the argumentation, but yeah, the counterplan was very, very decisive in my opinion.